What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 10.20 is already live. We're about a day and 8 hours late on this video because, well, patch notes come out now when I go to bed every morning. So, world schedule has made this difficult. Last night I recorded the preseason rundown. You can look for that on my profile. You click the Phreak thing down there, and then you find the preseason video. That one I might record a part 2 on, just because I had kind of rushed the end. Either way, we are here into the patch 10.20, so some of the win rate data is already out there and whatnot. So not again the most timely, but I think it's still an interesting patch. So let's talk about it. 10.20 is of course not going to be part of Worlds. This is basically Riot saying, okay, here are the champions that we wanted to buff but didn't because we are afraid of what it would do to pro play, which I think is totally respectable and totally acceptable to do. They want Worlds to be interesting, and, you know, as a ranked League of Legends player, I can suffer through 2 weeks of not picking Varus. It's fine. So we're into it. Let's go. Aatrox, Braum, Illaoi, Ryze, Sion, Urgot, and Varus buffs. I think the Sion buffs could have been beforehand, but whatever. All these nerfs are, of course, not because of pro play, because why would you nerf because of pro play? That would be really stupid. Pro play is not going to use this patch ever, so it's useless. So we have, again, really, if you're looking at purple and magenta, that's the pretty high elo, and then the bronze color is, for pretty much, average players. So pretty much these are all for roughly my elo. I'm plat 2 right now in solo queue. So, yep, Karthus definitely very, very strong. Oh, yeah, OP bot laner, by the way. I've played a lot of that. He's broken. I'm glad that's happening. Also, a really highly prized jungler, less so a mid laner. I think the nerf actually makes sense. But Kassadin, Katarina, Kled, Lulu, Maokai, Nunu, all definitely strong performers, high win rate champs. Maokai's the one I've been meaning to pick up because he's definitely really, really, really good. Arguably very OP in support as well as top lane. Although people are, very slowly picking up on that one. But yeah, Maokai definitely exceptional. Kled's been super high win rate forever. Cat's been high win rate forever. Nunu's been high win rate forever. They just made AP Nunu buffs a while ago. People are doing a lot of proto belt stuff with him, so it makes sense. So let's actually go into the changes themselves. So we get some Aatrox buffs. And this is a recurring trend. And the more I see this, the more I like it, actually. Fighters tend to be champions that are good in lane. You tend to beat up tanks. And then late game, you kind of just split push because... you can beat Ornn really easily in the one-on-one, but how you gonna 5-on-5 when, you had to build, you couldn't really build any bonus armor or MR or much bonus health. Like, yeah, okay, Triforce Death Stance or Cleaver Death Stance is like some durability, but this guy over here went, Forge Fire Cape and whatever the Abyssal Mask upgrade's called, so, I mean, it's really not close in durability. How you gonna be a melee champion in that case? And so what they've been doing is they've been buffing the late game ultimates on fighters and like really going ham on that, right? So what's interesting is, for example, Aatrox's self-healing scales by itself. Like if this number never changed, the ultimate would still scale because your damage goes up, the amount of health you can get back because your health pool increases goes up. Like 50% increased self-healing is... it's 50% more of everything you've ever bought. It scales with you buying Death Stance. It scales with, your Ravenous Hunter stacking up all the way. Like, it scales by itself. But I want to say that I like that they're further pushing the scaling. They're saying, well, it scales by itself, but, unless you get the perfect, triple Q knockup and all the G2 fans are sad, Aatrox doesn't have the best late game team fighting, and the same kind of goes for Aurelia, etc., etc. Like, I actually really like that they're putting a lot more power into the max rank ultimates because, I mean, fighter ultimates are pretty crappy in a lot of cases. I mean, realistically, they are. So, I like this idea. I like doing it. Here is a data table as I blind myself, and your screen changes a little bit. So yeah, we've got the amount of healing is different by this much, right? If considering that your self-healing is already 100%, going from 170 to 200 is only an 18% increase. So even though this change looks pretty big on paper, wow, look at the self-healing, it's up by 30% more self-healing. Well, kind of, but it's not 30% higher, it's 18% higher because the number that you're already, using is already pretty big. So still pretty good. I still like the idea of buffing rank 2 plus fighter ultimates. I think it's actually interesting. I want to see that happen more, and I want to see what happens as a result of that. Now, I don't want the best late game champions to be fighters, especially in team fights. because fighters are uniquely positioned to win almost all side lane 1v1 matchups. Who exactly beats Fiora outside of Jax at, level 18? Like, realistically, who? I mean, maybe Kassadin, but at least Kassadin can't lane unless you're, in the play-in stage and you let him lane for free. But, I like this. Again, I just want to point out, I think this is cool. Hope this is kind of keeps happening. I think it will be good. So we go into Braum. And Braum gets some pretty soft buffs. Of course, this is a top 3 support in Pro, I would say, right now. But he's getting 15 more damage on Q, which is pretty substantial. And 10 mana off of Q, which is also pretty meaningful. This is a front-loaded buff. This means a lot more for the early game. It lets Braum play a little bit more aggressively. This can be troubling because Braum is arguably, maybe it's Tahm Kench, but at least arguably, the best defensive tank. And they're amplifying his offensive powers, which somewhat makes Braum a samey champion. Like, he's never going to, and I guess to be fair, he's never going to be Alistar or Thresh or Nautilus, where he's actually got good hard engage. Like, they nerfed his R a lot to make that not the case. I think that was actually why. I think those were good changes. They're just letting Braum, I think, be a decent laner. Well, you're picking him to be a defensive support, but he is a good laner. I think that's actually a pretty good way of carving out a spot for him, because he will never do the things Nautilus does and never do the things Alistar does, and I think that's fine then. If they're not buffing his ultimate to have the same CC stuff, then I think you always have Braum in the right niche, because he's never going to do those things. So I don't like dislike the direction here. And as far as the actual meaningful buff, Braum Q has a % max health damage ratio on it. That said, it's not that big. If we are looking here, the 60 base damage becomes 74. I mean, that's not too bad. And the 260 base damage becomes 315, right? So 55 base damage. Now, this is not kind of the fact that he's going to always buy, like, the Stone Steel Pauldrons or whatever, or level 1. I still don't know what any of the ones that aren't Relic Shield are called, to be honest, but regardless, it doesn't matter anyway. Still a pretty meaningful buff, and as you can see here, it's a 20% damage bump for the first rank of the ability, which is pretty meaningful. I mean, 15 damage, is 15 damage at all points in time, but 15 damage obviously means more at level 2 than it does at level 18. Regardless, though, pretty decent buff. 10 flat mana, pretty meaningful at all points in time. Obviously, more meaningful in the early game. In most cases, you're not getting past level 13 on a support tank, so who cares what these numbers even are? But end of the day, yeah, it's a lot more Q spam, and the Q is more meaningful. This is a laning phase buff to Braum, and this should be pretty substantial. Upwards of 1.5%, I would say. This is pretty good. Illaoi gets a pretty aggressive buff to the passive tentacle spawning. It's a pretty mild buff in the early game, but it's a pretty aggressive one in the late game. As you can see, 12 becomes 7.25. And so let's go look at this. This is the cooldown change. Now that it's instead of 1 every 2 levels, it's just 0.75 per level. So from level 2 onwards, obviously it's a buff. I will say 20 becoming 19.25 is not a meaningful buff, to be clear. Also worth pointing out that I think, so I've thought about this before, and I'm still of two minds about it. So on the one hand, I want to say that this cooldown change is not as good as it appears, because so frequently as Illaoi, you're in a spot where you have no room for new tentacles anyway. And so the cooldown lapses, and there's no room, and then you finally move forward, or a tentacle dies or whatever, and hey, it's up, we spawned the tentacle. And so you just have it regardless of what the cooldown is. Now, that's a persuasive argument, somewhat. The other side of that argument, though, is that's like saying a Maokai Q cooldown doesn't matter because, well, most of the time you cast Q, it was going to be up anyway. It's like, well, but we know cooldown buffs matter. So which is it? And that's why I don't know how to feel about this, because on the one hand, my first instinct is this buff is not as meaningful as you might think, at least in, the first 6 levels where the difference is only 10%. 1.75 seconds, maybe not that meaningful. Maybe it is. But the other side is, but don't do this. We're talking about, over the course of 15,000 games, how much more often does Illaoi spawn a tentacle? And that is a non-trivial number of those 15,000 games, right? I don't know exactly how many of them it is. I don't play much Illaoi, nor do I play much top lane, but this absolutely does have an impact. Because, again, we're measuring across all the Illaoi games, how many more games does she win? Well, some, because she's going to have states where she wants tentacle spawn, and that's going to make her killing the enemy Darius and not. So it matters. And so, yeah, this is a non-trivial buff. The biggest thing is late game buff. I think while Illaoi, it's like both is and isn't a great late game champion. It really depends on how your opponents play around it. Having played against a decent amount of Illaoi in my time, because she eventually becomes invincible. Because if you team fight her, she just hits R and slaps tentacles around, and even if the R falls off, she's still going to spawn there pretty quickly, and use her E and her Q and her W auto and all that, and get a bunch of healing done because she's tanky enough as a 6-item fighter. On the other side of it, though, if you can just kite the Illaoi, okay, outside of landing her E, she just does nothing. Or if you just team fight her well, like you Buster Shot her out or whatever, suddenly you're fine again. End of the day, though, this is obviously a more meaningful endgame buff to Illaoi. I would say in general, I feel like Illaoi needs help late game just because team fighting can be tough on her. I'm not sure that's actually true. Data would tell me if I'm right or wrong. I haven't looked at it. But overall, not mad about the buff. Good stuff, Illaoi. Karthus loses 2.88 armor. This puts him very, very low. 18 is roughly where Orianna lives, and Orianna has very, very low base armor. This is an attempt to push Karthus out of bot lane. This will also affect his jungle somewhat. Now, the better Karthus is, of course, can kite camps very well. You will still take some hits, though. This will matter some. I think it's totally fine for Karthus jungle to also lose some win rate, to be clear. This is less likely to hurt Karthus mid lane. Because realistically, Karthus mid is not dealing with that much physical damage. Yes, you might be in some auto attack trades, and this will also, by the way, just hurt team fighting in general. Mid lane Karthus will still lose win rate here, because mid lane Karthus invariably has to deal with physical damage, and dying sooner matters. Armor is a stat that, and same with the MR really, a flat nerf at level 1 is still going to carry through to level 18. In general, that's just kind of how that works. This will mostly hold intact through most of the game, but definitely aimed at bot lane where there's a lot more physical damage because you're likely against Lucian and Kalista and such. So I like the change. Here is the math. It is, as you can see, a roughly 2% physical damage durability decrease at all times. As we kind of scale it out, right? It rounds to 2% the whole time, but 2.5 to 1.5, still, yep, fairly meaningful armor decrease. Ending at 80ish or 78 or whatever, yeah, makes sense. That's where you're gonna end up. So, yeah. Fan of this change. Karthus definitely is way too powerful. Definitely an OP bot laner. And Karthus will still be probably like a 53% or so bot laner, to be clear. 2.9 armor is a meaningful nerf. And he will still be exceptionally strong, and I will still play him some. We then go to Kassadin. Kassadin has quickly realized that Q's rank up is so bad that he can max E and simply get all the benefits of Null Sphere that he wanted anyway. 40 shielding is going to block, a rank 1 spell regardless, and getting 120 more health out of that's not as meaningful as just simply having your first Force Pulse be even better. And so they're saying, okay, well, they're maxing E. It's just too good. So they're saying, hey, if you want the landing phase to be a little bit easier, go ahead and put some points in Q earlier. And don't get the E max, so you don't have as easy of wave clear. E has a lower cooldown and more damage. If you can max E, obviously you want to. This, of course, won't really affect Kassadin's physical damage matchups, but okay. But yeah, Kassadin, I think, does need the nerf. So here's the shield, assuming you're maxing Q second. This is the data. And yeah, it's 20 less health for a very long time. For a substantially long amount of time, this is going to be meaningful. I would say more often than not, if you are trading in a Kassadin's Q shield and you're not just using an Orianna auto attack, you're going to fully break the old shield, and so you're going to get the benefit out of the nerf here as the playing against. Obviously, if you're playing Lucian or something against him, it's not going to matter. Your W's not breaking the shield regardless, so who cares? But for the magic damage matchups, yeah, this is a meaningful nerf. It will lower him by a little bit. Maybe 1%, maybe 0.5%. Not massive. The only way this would swing more than that is people went back to Qmax, and because Qmax is just the weaker build, I think you still don't change your skill order, and that's fine. But I would be pretty happy with a world where it's at least close between maxing Q and maxing E. Right now it's not, although there's a bias with that data because only skilled Kassadins or Kassadins who look up win rate data know to max E. Q is the obvious max, but E is the better max. and most people are actually still maxing Q. Like, Q is still the more likely max than Emax, but Emax is like 4% or 3% higher win rate. So Katarina is losing 0.25 bonus attack damage on her passive. Now, the best of my ability, or best of my knowledge, okay, certainly Katarina does pick up a longsword a lot of times to start her laning phase, and then, you know, with her runes, she actually has, like, you know, 17 attack damage or something. So that's obviously not trivial, but basically I'm doing this math as though you have mid-game and you have built a Gunblade, which is 40 bonus AD, because Kat doesn't really buy any more AD than that. So this is Katarina with 40 bonus AD. Obviously, if you have 20 bonus AD, which is roughly longsword plus runes, just, you know, have the difference. But obviously, if you're losing 0.25 AD ratio on 40 attack damage, it's 10 damage. It's pretty easy to look at there, right? So unless I did the math wrong, you know, the base damage of this ability is in fact 68. So, you know, it becomes 68 plus 30 instead of 68 plus 40. So, you know, 68 plus 20 instead of 68 plus 15 or vice versa. Like, yeah, it's, you know, a 5% damage cut with half as much attack damage with plus 20 to 50% damage, or a 5% damage cut. That is not trivial. I mean, this is obviously an early game focused nerf. She buys Gunblade first. Like, even if you know, do fully finish the item, you're coming on around here maybe. Level 10-ish, I think, is about right for mid laners to finish their first, you know, 3,000 plus gold item. Yeah, I mean, this is where you're at, right? It's 10 damage off your full combo once Gunblade's done. Well, full combo, you're going to get multiple of these, but it's 10 damage, right? I don't think we're going to see AD Cat anytime soon, although there are, on the PvE, some AD Cat changes to try to make that a possible build, so we'll see how that one goes. Either way, I think it's still kind of interesting. Cat's definitely too strong. She is a worthy nerf, and glad it's happening. We go to Kled. Kled is also too strong. Kled is also showing up in mid a little bit, which is a little scary. Mid Kled is definitely a little strong. He really destroys a lot of mages. Kled overall definitely an overtuned champion. I've tried to play him a bunch. I'm not good at him. I know he is very strong though. And so he's losing a pretty massive 4.1 magic resist, and that's a pretty meaningful cut. You can see here. We'll go ahead and increase the number of digits, and you can see yes, it's a pretty flat 3% damage, or 3% durability change here, right? So 100 plus armor or MR divided by 100 plus old MR. Yeah. I mean, this is what you can kind of say about this. This obviously hurts his mid lane a lot. Worth pointing out, by the way, that this is a new champion with non-standard magic resist. As Riot's doing it more and more, I'm like, okay, well, we've broken the trend. We can no longer assume armor and MR very much anymore. I still want the champion for champions having an armor MR budget, and just saying, look, your health is so much, your armor and MR is so much, and we will change the relative values so that at least across a class, but I believe across League of Legends, you have the same total armor MR budget, no matter what level you are, and your health bar and the skew of armor MR dictates how durable you are against damage types. Right, if you want to push Kled into top lane and away from mid lane, right, you skew towards armor away from MR because Aurelia and Darius live up there and Orianna lives over here. And that makes sense. Like, it's actually a pretty good tuning lever, honestly, all things considered. It's one of the more elegant tuning levers. And that's fine. That's totally reasonable. The only difficulty I have is when champions have, like, low armor or low magic resist, but their base health is so high, it's like, well, no, they're actually equally durable against everything because they just have less armor MR base stats. They're not really, like, I don't know right away what Kled's armor is. Like, if his armor is 30, he was always an anti-mage because 30 armor is trivially low or exceptionally low for a melee champion. Right? And without looking it up, you don't know either. Was Kled MR skewed? Maybe. Because we don't, right? Like, because Riot doesn't budget that. And it's like a really minor thing. Like, this would never be an exciting season update. This would be, you know, a fairly large amount of work. Well, okay, it'd be a moderate amount of work for Nebulous upside. But anyway, I'm just going to rant about that almost every time. Moving on. Lulu is, you know, I dislike clean numbers, or the unclean numbers, the 3.75%. You know, like 1%'s not enough of a difference. It's got to be less than that. you know? It's a weird hang up. Like, it doesn't actually matter. Especially the more write updates tooltips to just show you the output number after the AP ratio, the less these decimals matter because they're just going to round those things anyway. The actual result is going to be whatever it's going to be, but you know they round for ease of reading, which is correct entirely. But so on the one hand, it's like, wow, this feels really weird to have unclean numbers, but also like would a nerf less than 5% to 10% be meaningful as a nerf? Kind of not really. Now, yes, if they really cared about late game whimsy, they could have done, you know, something a little bit different and, you know, maybe found a way to do like, I don't know, still 35 in the end game, but maybe 22 and it scales by 3% per level or something. Like, I don't know. Like, who cares, right? Like, yes, this could have been 23 to 35 instead of, you know, and it is a 2% nerf becoming a 10% nerf or whatever the actual number is supposed to be. Again, it doesn't really actually matter. It's a really minor thing to actually care about, but you know, it could have been that. Regardless, whatever. Lulu definitely is a very strong performer. This is basically piping in all of the math into Lulu's base attack speed and Lulu's attack speed growth. Now, Lulu has kind of fairly low attack speed growth, like it's not the highest, but this at least kind of vaguely shows you how big the nerf really is. It's a 4 to 5% attack speed nerf overall. We can, you know, spit out the decimals here. Yep, it's a 4 to 5% attack speed nerf to champions who aren't buying a lot of attack speed. If you buy like 140-ish% bonus attack speed, so, you know, you're Kog'Maw, this nerf is, you know, half as big of a nerf in the end results, right? It's now a roughly 2 to 3% overall attack speed nerf. Regardless, yeah, I mean, again, Lulu is a top performer. She is arguably the best enchantress right now. So, yep, here, lower your offensive power. That's fine. I mean, I think Lulu is most interesting when Whimsy's providing movement speed, when you're turning people into squirrels, when you're using wild growth. Like, those are the more interesting abilities. So Whimsy's attack speed is, I would say, one of the least interesting. So yeah, I'm down with that getting the nerf. Maokai, apparently mostly done from his top lane presence, although his support presence also is climbing and the win rate's very, very high, and he's losing 0 to 20 damage on his Q. So there you go. There's the data table. Ultimately, I actually spent some time looking at Maokai support, like skill order stuff, and ultimately I still believe Qmax is optimal down there. Qmax is very obviously optimal in the top lane. The most common Maokai builds aren't Qmaxing, although I think that's incorrect. I think it's slightly better to Qmax. Regardless, though, yeah, this is going to do a pretty, you know, big hit on Maokai top lane. I am glad they waited till after Worlds to do this because I think Maokai could have a spot in Worlds, and considering that no one's playing him right now, nerfing him would make that absolutely 0% chance, but I think Maokai is viable. He's totally solid tank pick, and, you know, we might see him a little bit at Worlds. Regardless, I think he's full champion. He's one of my go-to top laners because I'm not good at top lane, and if I get autofilled, I'll just play a tank and I'll wait for late game, and Maokai lets you do that if you're not against Darius. Pretty meaningful nerf, want to say. This is well-sized. Nunu loses 3 armor, which is, as we discussed, going to be about 2.5% damage durability. Here we go. 2.3. I was close. And it became 1.6. Yeah, so 3 armor off. And notice, by the way, that Nunu is a jungler, you know, arguably, who has quite low armor for a melee champion, right? It's now sub 30. So Nunu as a champion is magic resist skewed. And, you know, you can do that because you can still assume 32.1 magic resist at level 1. And with 29 armor, it means he's fairly low for a melee. If I have my numbers right, but I'm pretty sure melees often reach 30 plus. I know that the support tanks certainly do. Which I actually have a sneaking suspicion is why mages are so good in bottom lane, is support tanks have absurd armor levels. And so support tanks just don't die to marksman. Whereas they actually die to things like swing. And so when you're playing a double mage bot lane, you actually just destroy Braum because he doesn't have any stats against you. Which, again, I think is problematic. And if we're giving champions armor MR budgets, as I go back on the same tangent again for the 3rd time in the same video, like if people are saying, wow, look at these win rates, mages bot lane are OP, and then fail to look at the fact that Braum has like 50 armor at level 1, you're missing something. Moving on, for real though. Yeah, I mean, this is going to... I mean, we don't see a lot of lane Nunu, and if we do, it's often mid lane where he's against mages, so it's not really going to hit that very much, which is fine. I don't think mid Nunu's OP, at least as far as I can tell. But jungle Nunu is going to be less durable while jungling. And honestly, yeah, he's going to be a little bit more killable when he goes to gank your top laner. You have a chance at, 2.5% greater chance at fighting him back, which, yeah, okay, sure. Nunu definitely, again, incredibly high win rate. And so a lot of the really top-performing junglers are going down this patch, like Karthus, like Nunu. Makes sense. Next up, we have Ryze, who's getting a flat 10 damage on his Q. Of course, this is more than 10 damage in most real applications because we have the spell flux damage amp and whatnot. But regardless, the percentages is why we're here. It is a pretty substantial damage buff. Now, right, we're back to actually having 5 points in Q, I believe. That was changed for a while. I think we're back. I'm pretty sure we're at 5 points on Q again. I don't play almost any Ryze. But yeah, pretty meaningful buff. Ryze has been steadily climbing. He's almost playable in solo queue as far as like generic win rate data goes. He's obviously able to be a fairly safe laner with just like EQ spamming the minions down. Obviously, he builds a ton of mana. He's going to go Ravenous Hunter. He's going to heal up against us a whole bunch. Sure, of course, there we go. Makes sense. But I mean, I'm generally a fan of champions, reaching closer and closer to 50% win rate. In general, that's a positive for me. So good job, Ryze. This is, again, a pretty meaningful buff. Now, again, Ryze does tend to get... I believe Ryze has pretty generous ratios, all things considered, when you consider the AP and the mana ratios coming in. So the base damage is a relatively lower part of Ryze's damage output. I believe that's true. I'm not certain that's true. But yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be in a much better spot. Pretty big nerf, pretty big buff, obviously. This is cool beans. And then we go to Sion Q. Now, they're charging up his Q damage, a fun bonus. He can slay baby raptors more efficiently with his QW combo. Yes, of course. So damage ratio to monsters. There might be a typo here, or I might be misunderstanding or something else. So first of all, the AD ratio, right? The actual attack damage ratio of Sion Q scales with rank. So it's not a flat 1.0 attack damage ratio becoming a flat 1.5 attack damage ratio. Also, if it's just the ability does more damage to monsters, why would you say 1.0 attack damage and then 1.5 attack damage? Which made me believe it's not just Decimating Smash now deals 50% bonus damage to monsters, because that would have been easy. That's not what's being said. So I did something different. Now, it may well be 50% bonus damage to monsters, in which case, you have the numbers. It's 50%. Congratulations, we did it. We're done here, right? The math has been completed, 50%. I decided to do something wonky, which was take the total attack damage ratio on the ability and multiply it by 1.5. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's what I did. So if you do multiply the attack damage ratio by 1.5, well, you get about a 25% damage increase because the attack damage ratio is roughly half the damage of the ability. This might well be wrong, but it's what I did. Or maybe it was that Q actually had a monster attack damage ratio override, which was always 1 and was always 1.5. I guess it's also a possibility, although to my knowledge, that's not true either. Regardless, it is somewhere between a 25 and 50% damage increase against chickens. That is pretty meaningful. Sion is going to absolutely destroy chickens really fast, of course. And I mean, overall, when the red buff spawns, you're going to be charging up your Q, and you're going to be doing, 25 to 50% more damage, which makes your clear better. This is meaningful. I don't know what Sion Jungle's win rate is. I just know his level 6 ganks are gotta be pretty scary. Seems fun regardless. Urgot is getting a damage to monsters cap softened. So what I believe, by the way, I believe Echoing Flames is not a flat damage to monsters. It is a damage cap to monsters. This is somewhat misleading, although I could be wrong about this one. Because Echoing Flames has a total AD ratio and a percent of target's health ratio. And so what I did is, and then also Purge just does 50 flat damage to minions and monsters. it's capped as a minimum, and then if your total AD is higher, it goes above. So here is this. Okay, so here is Urgot's passive monster health cap, right? So how much health does a monster have to have before the damage is capped against it? Which means, by the way, if the monster ever has less health in this column, the buff doesn't matter, assuming that I have this correct. If the number is ever lower than this, the buff doesn't matter. It's instead capped at this number, which is basically right around 5,000 at all times. Just, FYI, there's the math. So, early game red and blue buff, absolutely. Big Krug, nope. Wolves, chickens, nope, none of that, right? The passive, not going to get that going on. Now, there is I don't think there's much else I can say here. Unless for some reason it's Urgot's total AD plus the percent total AD, like it's his regular attack plus the percent total AD plus the percent health, and all of that is capped. That would feel really troll that it would be capped at 60 level 1, because that's basically his total attack damage in the first place. That would feel really wrong to me, and I feel like that's not true. Regardless, again, assuming that it is, they're just changing the max cap, it's this. If it's not changing the max cap, obviously, just use this, because that's still going to be accurate math, right? It's, right, going from 60 to 100 is, in fact, 2/3 more damage. We'll see. And then also we have the buff to Purge, because Purge is minimum capped now at 50 against monsters. It didn't have a minimum cap before. This is the real buff, because Purge does double damage now. So now when you take your first camp and you cast Purge, the total output of the ability is doubled. Okay, maybe not quite doubled because this isn't doubled, but it's 50 damage, I think, 3 times a second, which is a lot. Now, I will say, in the real world, Urgot is, I would say, almost certainly, now I'm not certain, I'd actually look this up, I didn't look it up, but I would bet you Urgot goes for Hunter's Machete, which is the, I believe, 25 flat on-hit damage, and on-hits are halved against monsters, but this guy still attacks 3 times a second, and so you're still getting, 20-some-odd on-hits, which is a lot of damage that, isn't going anywhere, because that's still going to be the same number going through, but still meaningful, right? This is still a very meaningful amount of damage. It stops being a buff finally at level 13, or as you get more attack damage, or your enchant, then okay, yeah, it goes online sooner. But if you're using base AD and going full tank, it's a buff against monsters to level 12. Regardless, it's going to be a huge buff in the early game. This is really, really meaningful. Now, it's interesting, and I am glad they waited until World to do this, is a while back, Urgot, if I recall correctly, I forget which side it was, but Urgot had a far higher win rate in either top or jungle in solo queue, but players only played him in pro in the weaker of the two roles. Even though the win rate data was really obvious, where it was wait, Urgot is actually an absurd top laner, and Maokai is a really absurd jungler. You should play it that way. But pros only played Maokai top and Urgot jungle. I believe I have that iteration correct. So pros were overplaying Urgot jungle despite Urgot top being better, if I recall correctly. Now, of course, fast forward a bit, Urgot top is all that's really getting played now. Urgot jungle is ignored. I assume win rate data supports this, because Urgot jungle has always been the weaker of the two, if I recall correctly. And so here's some Urgot jungle buffs, because they can get them there. This seems to continue the trend of Riot trying to buff more champions into jungle. So if you're a top laner and you're autofilled jungle, you're like, oh, I know Urgot, I can play Urgot jungle. I think this is still a really good thing. I think they should target around a 48% win rate for all of this. Not all champions got there, to be clear. There are some real stinkers out there from, when they buffed things a while ago. I think Mordekaiser is still really, really bad over there. And whatever they did that whole last round of buffs, it was pretty bad. As we silence my phone. But again, cool to see it. I like this. Let's move on. Varus is getting 10 flat damage added to his E, and the Chain of Corruption cooldown is going down by 10 seconds here as well. Now, I'm immediately realizing I might have made a mistake, and Varus E has a total AD ratio, but I believe it doesn't. I know that Q does, but I'm pretty sure E is bonus. Regardless, if I'm wrong, sorry about that. Either way, this is a pretty meaningful damage increase, of course. Keep in mind that Lethality Varus, Caster Varus, was absolutely running over pro play, and to be fair, solo queue as well. So Caster Varus was maybe the best solo queue champion and absolutely the best pro play champion. Riot nerfed Varus enough to be weak in solo queue, and pros refused to hop off Varus. Riot nerfed him again, and he finally disappeared. I don't remember, off the top of my head, if this is an exact revert of the most recent nerfs to Varus that made him disappear, but I do know that looking at Worlds so far, we are now at a weaker Caitlyn than when she was 0% pick ban, and she's being played at Worlds. So the idea of pros overcorrecting is a real thing, or like undercorrecting and then just leaving the champion pool the way it is despite changes. So Varus is probably still too weak to play in solo queue. I don't think these buffs are enough to make Varus good. That's fine. He's going to get a complete overhaul in the preseason update when the items all change, because Lethality Varus is going to look a lot different when that comes through. So we'll see. And regardless, here we are. This is still a solid buff. This is going to help, of course, but Varus will still be too weak to play. Relentless Hunter, to my surprise, is actually outperforming other runes, especially in mid lane. I didn't realize that, but they're bringing it down. They're basically bringing down the reliability by lowering the rank 0 stack, and then, I mean, further lowering it afterwards. But, okay, so let's talk about this. Here is the Relentless Hunter move speed, 1019 to 1020. Right. This is assuming, by the way, a 370 move speed champion, which is 325, which is the lowest normal base speed, plus boots 2. So, you know, Orianna with Sork shoes is a 370 base move speed champion. That's not exactly realistic, because obviously 0-star Relentless Hunter is indeed going to be also a champion walking in the lane for the first time. Or Relentless, I might have misspoke. But regardless, it is still 5 move speed difference. It's not that gigantic. As you fully stack all the way, it's a 10 move speed difference. Again, not that gigantic. You know, if we want to, you know, remove 45 move speed from all these, we could, but the math doesn't change very much. This is a pretty small hit to overall move speed. It's actually a bigger hit in the late game, all things considered. Running around the map and getting stuff done. I am surprised that data shows this is better than Ravenous Hunter. I'm also surprised they're bothering to do this, considering that Ravenous Hunter is getting an update in the preseason. But that said, it's not like Riot shouldn't buff and nerf things when there's still several months left in the rank season and people want to get to their, you know, their ranks. So I shouldn't say how dare Riot nerf something that deserves a nerfing, because that's stupid of me to say. So I take it back. Regardless, yeah, 5 to 10 move speed off. Not a trivial nerf. Worlds 2020 Clash is going to have a 16-team bracket. That's going to be fun. A bunch of bug fixes and QOL stuff. That sounds cool. Upcoming skins and chromas. Okay. Woo. Patch 10.20 TLDR. Let's get into it. Aatrox buffs in the late game, levels 11 and onwards when he feels this. I like the idea of buffing late game fighter ultimates. I think it's an interesting experiment that we're seeing a lot of, and I want to keep seeing it. Should be a pretty moderate buff, should be quite a bit. Braum gets 15 flat damage in the queue and 10 mana cost off. This should be pretty meaningful. Braum should be very good post-patch. Illaoi gets a buff that mostly matters in the late game. It's like a 1-second cooldown buff at like level 5-ish. Not massive, obviously, but could do quite a bit for the late game. Overall, a moderate Illaoi buff. I'm going to guess like 0.5%, maybe probably 0.5%. Karthus is almost 3 armor. That is really meaningful. He will still be an OP bot laner. He will still be a good jungler in high elo where people can kite camps. Should be totally fine as a mid laner. Armor nerfs are a good way of kind of approaching where Karthus is too strong, and, you know, yeah, I like it. Kassadin Emax is optimal, so they're making Q max more necessary, or at least points in it a bit more meaningful. I don't think Kassadin's build order will change, but it will certainly nerf him by 0.5%, probably 0.5% win rate. Katarina loses 10 damage on her passive per 40 bonus attack damage. 40 bonus AD is what Gunblade is. And, you know, you're going to be at like 18-ish with Longsword and Runes, so, you know, about half that much, about 5 damage off in the early game. Yeah, this actually hurt quite a bit because, you know, she is doing a lot of bonus AD stacking in the very early game, and this is where the nerf matters because she's actually pretty much a terror in the first few levels. Kled loses 4.1 magic resist, which is pretty meaningful. This will push Kled a little bit more out of mid lane and lower his overall win rate against tanks a bit because they have a better chance of scrapping against him. Although he's still very good against tanks. Lulu loses 5 to 10% bonus attack speed on Whimsy. Pretty meaningful there as well. She is arguably the best enchantress, and so down by a bit. Makes sense to me. Maokai loses 0 to 20 damage on his Q. Top lane Maokai maxes this first. Support Maokai should max this first. Both of those roles, Maokai is overpowered. I am sorry to Maokai jungle. You're probably going to be in a pretty bad spot. Oh well, that's life. But yeah, overpowered, so still strong. Nunu loses 3 armor. Also still going to be pretty strong. Very, very well-performing jungler. Should still be above 50% win rate. Should still be fine. Ryze gets 10 flat damage more on Q. Definitely, to my understanding, an underperforming mid laner, top laner, whatever overall. Ryze is a cool champion. I never really tried to learn him yet, mostly because he's never been good enough in solo queue to be worth putting in time. But edging Ryze towards 50%, kind of a cool thing. We don't see much Ryze in pro play. That's okay. We can skip rolls without him. I'm all right with that. Still fine to see it. Sion does somewhere between, depending on how this is actually meant to be interpreted, between 25 and 50% more damage to jungle monsters with his Q. That is pretty meaningful, especially when you get hit breakpoints like one-shotting chickens or maybe one-shotting the small wolves. This will buy you a lot of time long-term in your clear as a result of that. This could be a pretty substantial buff to jungle Sion. Cool. Urgot gets a pretty solid damage bump against monsters. Now, I want to point out that based on what I researched, this is the damage cap against monsters, which the cap is between 3 and 6,000 health pre-buff and moves to between roughly 5 and 6,000 health post-buff. So if your jungle monster has less than 3,000 health, this buff doesn't matter. It does not help you kill chickens any faster, but it will help you kill red buff and big Kruk and things like that. Purge, however, is massively buffed. At level 1, it is double damage before runes, which is something, of course. This is a very meaningful buff. Jungler Urgot will gain a lot of power here. Jungler Urgot may well be the winner of this patch, and it might be Freelo. Varus gets 10 damage on E and 10 seconds off the R. Those are both good, but Varus is still too weak to play. Don't lose your elo. Relentless Hunter, to my surprise, apparently has been overperforming in mid lane. I know it's been very good on some junglers. I was surprised to see it OP in mid, but I trust Riot's data sources. So it's 5 to 10 move speed off overall, which will nerf it down a little bit. Thanks for watching. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you next time.